Well, good day. It is Tuesday, February 17th. I'm Carleen Johnson with another episode of Washington in Focus Daily. It's day 37 of the 2026 regular legislative session. There's 23 days left. And yesterday, Monday, was President's Day. Memorable one here in Olympia for certain, as Democrats in the Senate passed the income tax bill off of the Senate floor. That came after hours of debate on GOP-backed amendments that were all rejected. And there were then hours of impassioned floor speeches. So we're going to get into that in a minute. Another taxing bill that's kind of flown under the radar this session, a Democrat-backed bill to actually roll back the massive increase in the estate tax, or the death tax, that was passed just last year. So why roll it back now? We'll get into that. And then some of the most emotional speeches I've seen so far this session came up last night on the House floor when Republican Representative Travis Couture attempted to force majority Democrats to bring 3 bills onto the floor for a vote. These are all bills that concern the protection of children in homes with drug-addicted parents. So that's what we're going to be getting into on today's episode of Washington in Focus Daily. So let's dive right in. So it was, yes, lengthy debate Monday. I was here at the Capitol watching the Washington Senate pass the income tax bill out of the chamber with no Republicans in support. And actually 3 Democrats ended up joining all the Republicans in opposition. This is Senate Bill 6346, imposing a 9.9% tax on individuals on the receipt of their income in excess of $1 million. That would start in calendar year 2028. So opponents, of course, believe this measure is unconstitutional, and they also say it would be expanded over time, such that it won't just be a tax on the wealthy. It'll eventually trickle down to all the rest of us. Supporters argue it's needed to fix what they call a regressive tax code. They want to use some of the money to fund education, some for health care, and to provide tax relief for working families. So on the Senate floor, late yesterday afternoon, just before or maybe it was about 20 minutes before the final vote off of the Senate floor, Senator Drew McEwen, a Republican from Union, was passionately urging a no vote, telling fellow lawmakers and the president of the Senate that more tax revenue is not the solution at this point. It's a spending problem, he says, we've got, not a revenue one. And he argued there's not nearly enough tax relief offered in the bill. So here's some of Senator McEwen's floor speech late Monday.
But the people in my district are very concerned because, as has been previously alluded to, that the goalposts continuously move when it comes to tax policy in the state. And there's a real fear that this is someday going to affect everybody. This is being presented to us that this is going to solve the regressivity of our tax code in the state of Washington. That argument would be true, Mr. President, if there was true tax relief for the middle class and the working people of this state. But there's not. How many emails do any one of our offices get talking about property taxes and my parents or my grandparents are on the verge of losing their home, or somebody else can't afford to even buy a home because of that tax burden? There's no relief in here for that. I get those emails all the time. I don't get an email about the tax burden of their deodorant and their soap purchases. Frankly, I find the language in this bill insulting to the people of my district, that's the tax relief they're going to get. If you truly believe that our tax code is upside down in this state, then this bill was an extraordinary opportunity to write it. But it doesn't. It takes more money and spends the bulk of it over, depending on which way you cut it, roughly 95% of it is spent. Very little tax relief is going to the people. The state is going to take more and more, distribute out some crumbs and say, be thankful. That is not good policy. And capital is mobile. And we've seen that. And does that make them villains? I don't think so. It was suggested that they're not doing their part. And I find that somewhat resentful.
So it passed out of the chamber. Of course, there are bound to be constitutional challenges, assuming this ends up passing the House and is signed into law by the governor. It could be another ballot initiative to undo it. We'll wait to see. It's probably going to be years, actually, for all that to play out and before it's implemented. And then, of course, we're going to see what Governor Ferguson thinks of the version that passed. Remember, he said the first version that was offered by Senator Jamie Peterson, he said didn't do enough to offer tax relief to Washingtonians. And he said he wouldn't support it in that current version. So we expect to find out later today what he thinks of that current bill, and we'll certainly provide an update on that. So with all the focus then on the income tax bill, just under the radar is this bill to undo tax hikes that Democrats passed last year. This is Senate Bill 6347, only one digit off the income tax bill. It's offered by Senator Claudia Kaufman of Kent, and it would change the rates that were approved a year ago for all 8 brackets for the estate tax or the death tax. So the wealthiest, of course, were hardest hit by the change last year that put that thing up to 35%. So they stand to be the biggest beneficiaries, if you will, of the proposal that would roll it back to basically exactly where it was a year ago. Now, I spoke with Mark Harmsworth, the director of the Small Business Center at Washington Policy Center. He told me he suspects that the reason that Democrats are ready to roll this thing back only a year after they jacked it up is that it's not bringing in the revenue that they expected from the estate tax. He explained to me as, it's relatively easy for somebody in, with a lot of wealth to, once they retire, all they got to do is move out of the state to avoid having to pay this massive death tax. And he thinks, Mark at Washington Policy Center, thinks that they've realized, majority of Democrats have realized that they put this thing up so high that the incentive to stay for the wealthy is not high enough. So that may be, in fact, why they're rolling it back. Now, Harmsworth wrote a piece on this Monday, as I did as well, up at the Center Square of Washington page. And in Harmsworth's piece on Monday, he noted that Brian Haywood, founder of Let's Go Washington, backer of the initiatives, recently told lawmakers that he knows dozens of couples that are right now eyeing moves out of this state. And data shows lots of households, people that earn more than $200,000, have left for places like Florida and Texas and Nevada. The Associated Press just put out a piece a week and a half ago, noting that a lot of wealthy Seattle transplants are going to Las Vegas and places like, Henderson, Nevada, just outside of Vegas, to escape things like the massive estate tax or the pending income tax. So that's what we're watching very closely as well. So I want to get now to last night's emotional speeches on the House floor. Representative Travis Couture, Republican from Allen, he tried a seldom attempted method to get a couple of bills up for a vote, bills that have not even been granted public hearings. And these bills all center around addressing the shocking increase in child deaths and near fatal incidents in homes with drug-addicted parents. A little bit of history here. It was 5 years ago that Democrats introduced the Keeping Families Together Act. And this was aimed at keeping kids in homes, oftentimes even in situations where the state has gotten involved and said, okay, there's abuse, neglect, drug use here going on, but the parents have maybe agreed that they're going to get into treatment. And so they're leaving the kids in those homes because they think it's more harmful, apparently, to put them in a foster home or take them away to put them with another, maybe it's a grandparent who's trying to get custody because they know that their grandkids are in homes, with drug addicted parents. And the benchmark then became imminent harm. And the threshold has to be imminent harm to take those kids out. So even judges have been saying, and caseworkers have been saying, that's too high of a threshold to reach. And that's why these kids are languishing in these homes. So here is part of Representative Couture's floor speech last night, where he was basically begging majority leadership to bring the bills to the floor. Here's some of his speech last night.
All sorts of people are backing this bill and begging, please, can we save these kids? All of these bills basically touch on the same thing, that the definition of imminent physical harm needs to be changed. A couple summers ago in Everett, 3 babies overdosed in the same day, all related to different families due to fentanyl exposure. 1 died, 2 were revived. And Mr. Speaker, the very next day, after being revived, we sent those babies back home to the dangerous environment, we have created a system that escalates risk upon risk upon risk, ace upon ace upon ace, traumatic experience upon traumatic experience, until finally that kid is harmed, nearly dead or dead. And isn't it nuts that we send babies back to the same fentanyl abusing home just a day after they were exposed to fentanyl and had to be revived? Is there an expert that says that's safe for the baby? Is there an expert that says that lowering services down a rope into a dark hole makes that home safe? I haven't heard an expert say that, Mr. Speaker, but what I have heard is families across our state devastated by their family members that they could not save. Family members that are the most vulnerable in our state. And if it's anything our state government could do, it's stand up for these babies and toddlers. Vote yes.
And then I want you to see part of the response from Majority Leader Joe Fitzgibbon, who could have brought those bills up, even though they weren't, didn't come up in hearings, didn't get public hearings. He still could have brought them up as majority leader. He has that option to bring those up. He did not like some of the comments that Representative Couture made on the floor. So here is Majority Leader Fitzgibbon responding, I would say in anger, that it was suggested by Couture that Democrats are leaving kids to die in these homes.
Every member on the floor of this body cares about children. Every member on the floor of this body cares about keeping children safe. You and I may not see eye to eye on what the best way is to do that. And that is why we have a committee process. We have a committee process so that committees can evaluate the proposals that come before them and decide what is the best thing for the people in our care. The committee with jurisdiction on this subject matter has decided that the bill, that this is the subject of this motion, is not the best way to keep kids safe. I don't know, Mr. Speaker, if you agree with that decision or if I agree with that decision, but that is why we have standing committees, is to evaluate what is the best thing to do.
So the bills were not brought to the floor. Representative Couture posted an emotional statement on his X page today, and it said, in part, I've exhausted every possible option this session to save innocent children who are dying at alarming rates in our child welfare system. I had only one option left. He described it as a Hail Mary to perform this rare procedural motion to pull those bills to the floor. He says each bill addressed the removal of kids from the absolute hell of being locked into homes with parents who abuse hard drugs like fentanyl. I know Representative Travis Couture very well. He's an emotional guy who wears his heart on his sleeve, cares a lot about these kids. And he basically said he feels devastated at the failure because he knows more kids will die and more kids will be harmed as a result of their failure to address this Keeping Families Together Act and the imminent harm threshold. So, a lot going on there, a lot happening. Again, we've got the governor with a press conference today that I will be sitting in for an update on see what he thinks of the version that passed off the Senate floor for the income tax bill. So we'll bring you those updates. For now, that's it. Day 37 of the session and today's Tuesday episode of Washington in Focus Daily. Check out our Center Square Washington page for more on these stories. Otherwise, for now, thanks for watching. Have a great day.